Welcome to our study called More Than You Can Think. We're looking at Genesis 17, 15 through 27. Now God has given Abraham some amazing promises. There was the promise of country when he owned no land. There was the promise of children when he had no child. Can you imagine being married for decades and then finally at the age of 86 you have your first child? Now people these days like to wait a long time before they start having their families, but that's kind of ridiculous. I'm 86 years old. Can you imagine just starting your family when you're 86? But with God, all things are possible. And so Hagar gives Abraham his first child. The exalted father finally becomes a father after 8 decades of life. But God is not done with Abraham. He comes into fatherhood, and God comes to this father with a single son, and he renames him. Abraham was called Abram, the exalted father, but God comes and changes his name to Abraham, which is the father of multitudes. Now, granted, he only has one son right at this point, so how is he going to be the father of multitudes? We'll have to wait and see. But that's what God changes his name to. Now, in the previous section of chapter 17, we saw that God gave Abraham a sign of the covenant, a sign of the promise, a sign and seal, a sign in his own flesh. Remember all that? So this sign of circumcision was a constant reminder to Abraham of the promises of God. It was a seal, a mark placed on Abraham himself and all of his descendants and all of his people in his household that God's promises were true, that these covenant promises were going to happen. Now, as we've traced the journey of faith that Abraham has had so far in his walk with God here, we've seen that Abraham has asked for assurances of the promises, and God has given to him. His faith was kind of wavering. He wasn't doubting the promises of God, but he was doubting, how is this going to happen? And fear probably had crept in there, and Abraham needed help. He believed, but he still had unbelief, just like all of us. God came and pointed him to the stars and then cut the covenant. But Abraham is a normal man, and his faith kind of ebbs and flows depending on the situation he finds himself in. Sometimes it's really strong and sometimes it's very small. So his desire is to grow in the faith, to be pleasing to the Lord, but yet he struggles. He's a normal guy. And his view of God is still too small. He needs a grander view of who God is. But here in chapter 17, specifically the section we're looking at in this study, God is trying to expand Abraham's view. Abraham's view of God is too small. It needs to keep growing. It's grown, for sure, but it needs to keep growing. Now, I hope that this study of the life of Abraham so far is having the same effect on you as it is on Abraham, and the same as on me. Our view of God and what he can do is too small. We easily forget that God is working all things out for our good. We forget that the Christian life is an abundant life. It's a hard life, but it's an abundant life. We, like sheep, always think we need a different pasture when the one that God has called us to is really the greenest pasture. We accept the smallest blessings from God's hand when we should be looking for the greatest that God can give to us. We just assume that, okay, God blessed me with this is the best he can do. That's not true. When trials and hardship come, we allow our view of God to shrink. He gets small in our eyes. But thanks be to God that he does not allow us to stay in that state. He doesn't allow us to stay in a state of having him really small. He usually comes, and right when we need him to, and makes our view of him so much greater, just like he does to Abraham. And as we look through this passage here in this study, we'll see that it's exactly what God does. Takes Abraham's small view and then begins to explode it before his eyes.